Those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Jerry Hahn, and I'm the Manager of Corporate Direct Relations for the CERIAS organization. So I have to rat out Mark a little bit. Mark and I started working together last year when I came into the symposium, and I realized when I saw him that he and I went to high school together. So we graduated, what, 12, 13 years ago, something like that? So just so you know. So I did want to point that out just so everybody knew. And secondly, Mark has been a great friend and partner to Purdue and CERIAS as well. And this evening at our poster session and our reception for the Coast Lab, Mark has brought, at no personal risk to himself, one of the Enigma machines. So does anyone remember the Imitation Game movie? Okay, so it's in the house. We have one. We're going to have it on display in the ballroom tonight during the reception. It is not a reproduction, it's the real thing. So there'll be armed guards around it, so be wary, but we will have that to show. So it's something to see if you'd like to come. So next up on the schedule, we have Lynn Turwoods, and Lynn is the Executive Director of the Executive Women's Forum. And I do want to also announce that during our Women in Cybersecurity event last evening, or Women in InfoSec, we announced a partnership between CERIAS and the Executive Women's Forum. So we're going to be offering a scholarship this fall. In exchange, and we are also going to be a sponsor for their Executive Women's Forum annual conference. So we're excited to get this ball rolling. So to spend a few minutes talking about the Executive Women's Forum and the recent survey is Lynn Turwoods.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Jerry. So I want to begin with why do we care, because I think that's very important. So ISC Squared, which is an organization that many of you may know, has a foundation called the Center for Cyber Safety and Education. And they conduct a biennial survey of information security professionals. And they've been doing this now, I think maybe they're on their 6th or 7th survey. In the past 3 biennia, if you want to say that, they've had a Women in Security, a separate sub-study. This year, I was privileged to be able to participate not only in helping to develop the questions, but also to help write this report. And you know, I think one of the reasons that we care about this is those of you who are here from industry know this, and I think many students do too. We have a severe labor shortage, and this is worldwide. This isn't just in North America. And, but it begets another bigger problem. And that is, unless we have diversity in our ranks and all levels, we cut off the innovation cycle is what we do. We end up not being as clever and as innovative as we will need to be in order to face the problems that we need to face down in the next, 50, 100 years, whatever that may be, because I don't think these things are going away. So as Jerry said, I'm with the Executive Women's Forum, which is a member organization for women in cyber. We've been around for 15 years, and I'll tell you a little bit about this, I think, at the end. But what I'd like to do is to get into some of the findings of the study. I mean, this is, of all audiences here, I really appreciate it because I know all of you value facts and data, and it helps us to paint a picture here that's based on facts and data. So I'll begin with some of the key takeaways. Globally, we represent about 11% of the population, women do, in cybersecurity. So let me put a little context around that. If you look at the international labor statistics, worldwide, regardless of what job you may hold, women hold about 40% or represent about 40% of the workforce. In IT, it's around 20 to 25%. So that gives you an idea of that ever-shrinking pool. So we're in a very rarefied area here, and you can see that in North America, we have a little bit of a better or higher percentage than, for example, Europe. So that may have been a little bit of a surprise to some of you here. So we're a small piece of the pie. Another piece here that we found out is that globally, men are 4 times more likely to be in the C-suite and to be in an executive level position, and 9 times more likely to be in a management role. Now, I know that many of you here are math geeks, so you're like, well, duh. Of course, you start with a small slice of the pie. You cannot expect to see representative numbers in the C-suite or even at the managerial level, okay? So it does make sense, but it doesn't make sense for us, right? Because again, we'll look a little bit later on. But what we'll find is when we start talking about, we posed questions around, bias in the workplace. You'll see some interesting statistics around that in a moment. Now let's talk about education, which I know is near and dear to all of you here. 51% of women versus 45% of men hold graduate degrees, and today, now this doesn't include the millennial population, okay, but today, women in cyber who are not millennials come from much more diverse educational backgrounds. And I represent that, by the way, because I stopped writing a dissertation in the Department of Classics because we got a grant, a computing grant. And it was the early days of the internet, and campus computing introduced me to this wonderful thing and said that I could talk to other colleagues around the world using Pine and Elm on my Unix shell account. So, that was the beginning of the end. I actually had no background whatsoever in computing, but I had an interest and a lot of curiosity. And as I was talking to you here at lunch, I started by putting computers together, and that began my multi-year learning curve. So I know anecdotally a number of women come from finance, HR, audit, places like that. Departments that may have had serious deficiencies in cyber controls and things like that. And that was their entree into cybersecurity. So that's not an uncommon thing. But again, when we talk about diversity, there's diversity of thought as well. As we know, there are many paths to the Buddha. And so we need to have a lot of different viewpoints to solve the kinds of problems that we're looking at. And it involves people with the traditional technical and science degrees, as well as those that have a very different path to cyber. So this just gives you a breakdown. You'll get all of these slides here. You can see what the breakdown is. Still predominantly computer and information sciences. Millennials, though, millennial women by far are on track to have a gender parity in the computer sciences area, which is great. So this is not a surprise. We know this because every study that's been done by ISC Squared has had the same result every 2 years. But I will tell you that the salary gap is starting to close at the executive levels. So this is, I think, a solvable problem. What we need to do is whatever is driving that has to be pushed downward to other levels as well, because parity in salary, again, we're having a facts and data discussion. Those of you from companies know that most companies have fairly detailed job descriptions, career ladders and paths, as well as salary ranges. And we have the ability within companies to even this out much more than we have today. Now, this is the thing that really kind of surprised us. We started to ask questions in last year's survey around overall what we would call organizational health. How happy are information security professionals at the job, okay? So what we found out, because when we asked them, have you experienced one or more forms of discrimination? And then we delineated what those types of discrimination might entail, from unconscious bias to outright, delay in your career, or my opinion is not valued. What we found that 51% of women experience one or more forms of discrimination in the workplace. And I double-checked this last night. The 15% of men were predominantly men of color, okay? So what that means is we have a lot of work, because if you are, regardless of who you are, if you're in the workplace and you feel that your opinion doesn't matter, and by the way, the number of women who answered the survey who said that they felt their opinion did not matter was almost 1 in 3, just under 1 in 3. It's a very significant number. When we think about the pipeline and we think about how we attract talent, how we retain that talent, and we remain competitive, that's a problem. And you also, even though the number is smaller, I don't think that 15% is insignificant either. So these are problems that we need to face into and to address fairly soberly. And as you can tell, I can't tell you all the reasons why. There's more research that needs to be done, and we're going to work on that. But this is beginning to, I think, help us to at least lift up the rug and look underneath and see what's there. And this just goes into the different types of forms of discrimination that we've talked about. Unexplained denial or delay in your advancement, unconscious discrimination, exaggerated highlighting of mistakes and errors, and so on. We worked with a number of organizations when we put the questions together, and I was very, very happy because we had some very spirited debates of what that list would include. And then you can see, this is very interesting to me, women who are more advanced in their career report higher level of instances of discrimination. I have a personal theory about that. It's not one that I can say we have facts and data around. But I wonder where we are in terms of when you get into the workforce and you're fairly new, how many of us are truly aware of company culture, of business, how things work. I think that takes some time. And I think once we get oriented to that, it would be interesting to know, too, for the men, whether or not that is also, even though it's a different ratio and proportion, whether or not it's a similar experience. Because some of these issues, as I'm talking to you about, women in cybersecurity, but some of these issues that we face really are not gender specific necessarily. We solve a lot of problems. Now, this is a little bit of a duh, but I think that it's very important because when we start to have the conversation, when we understand why it's important, then you start asking the question, so what do we do about this? Women in the workforce, and men too, who have had leadership development, who have had a mentor, who have had a sponsor, all of them, not surprisingly, feel happier at work. They feel more content in their job, and what you don't see here on this graph is that they tend to have been into their job for a longer period of time. And is anyone here who is with a company, when you're putting together a cybersecurity team, you want diversity on the team, but it really helps too to have a team with organizational understanding, what your business does, how your company works, all of those things. And that institutional knowledge isn't gained in the first 1 or 2 years on the job. So having someone in place and having some longevity at the company, not necessarily in the role, is important. And so you can see here that generally, people who feel valued, have had opportunities for leadership development, coaching, mentoring, and including going to conferences and getting training. So very important. And so sponsorship, by the way, I think we talked a little bit about this earlier, maybe it was yesterday, no, it was yesterday or last evening. A sponsor is someone that's beyond a mentor. That person's actually going to tell you whether or not there's a new opening at the company or an opportunity for advancement. They're going to recommend you for a stretch assignment, things like that. So sponsorship is a much more proactive thing. A mentor can eventually become a sponsor because they see in you the potential and want to open up more opportunities. And so we wanted to make that distinction in the survey this year as well. I would also, this is a crowd that you'll appreciate this, we almost doubled the number of respondents from this year as opposed to 2 years ago. And so it's another thing that made me very happy because, statistically, when you start looking at conclusions, you want to have the data to back that up, and you certainly want, the more people that respond to the survey, the better your data set. And some of these things, too, I'm not going into it here, but also have historical value. Not the new questions, but salary, certainly, and the number of women that hold managerial positions. That is a question that's been asked since the beginning of the survey, so we have historical data on that as well. I know that we're a little bit behind, so I don't want to. What I'd like to do is just to very quickly tell you that recommendations that we're making, you know, I think my first recommendation is some of these areas we need to now get beyond the survey questions and get to deeper research. But we really want to tell companies that just like the other things that you do in business, to have performance indicators to be able to look at how you recruit, who's on the interview loop, things like that are very, very important. And to have goals, actual goals that you know, look at whether or not you are truly have a diverse team, are enforcing you know, some type of gender parity in your organization. You know, the other piece too is if your company doesn't have a leadership development, mentoring, or some type of sponsorship or other types of opportunities, there are other organizations that you can leverage. Not every company is a multi-billion-dollar, you know, multinational corporation. There are many companies out there that are much smaller, where you know this isn't possible to to institute these kinds of programs. But there are other organizations out there. We certainly have those programs, and there are other organizations that have these types of programs as well. And I think this is important too, is just to be able to take a sober look inside your organization and say, you know, how are we doing? What are we doing? You know, I think one of the nice things about working with Purdue is that you have a history actually of supporting women. And it's an individuals that along the way made a conscious decision that said, we will do this, it's important. You know, I don't think that it's any more honestly dramatic than that. But that begins a culture, and what happens is, you know, you have success, and success breeds more success. And obviously, pay inequity, I talked a little bit about this earlier. I know, having worked for very large companies over the past 20 years, that you know, HR departments as well as hiring managers, all of us have, you know, this is a solvable thing. We need to look at it in a way that makes sense. I know that one of the biggest challenges for corporations is how do we not rock the boat? How do we not disenfranchise other people while we're trying to make a program like this happen? I get it. I totally get it. But doing nothing is obviously not working. And, you know, clearly, we really, really want to encourage, especially young women, into STEM programs. Even with a classics degree, you know, I have truly, upon leaving the university, I talked to the mathematics department and asked them whether or not I just shouldn't start a program with them, you know, given my interests, and just begin at the beginning. Even as a not as a graduate student, but as an undergrad, and they were very open and very willing to entertain that. It is important. There's a lot of things that we look at in our field that require, I guess, the curiosity and the passion for things that are technical, that are scientific and mathematical. The other piece here too is that in business, though, especially as we want more women in the C-suite, it's important that it's not just a technology problem, and it's not the only conversation you can hold. So we have to have a better, I think, understanding of the business overall, and what that requires too is I think, you know, diversity not only in your background, but also being open to other disciplines and appreciating them. So what I'd like to do is talk about the Executive Women's Forum. We've been doing this for 15 years. We have a mentoring program called LIFT. Leadership Journey is our leadership development program. We do other things as well. We have a scholarship program, and now we have a scholarship program with Purdue, which we're very proud of because it is important to feed that pipeline. But we also, we have a group that we look at millennials and understand what their needs are, because that's usually they're earlier on in the career life cycle. We also have a diversity and inclusion initiative because, as I said earlier, this issue cuts across a lot of different ways, and overall, we need to diversify the ranks. The Voice Privacy Alliance, I have a personal passion for voice-enabled IoT. and to provide back to industry, to give back to industry tools and thought leadership around what it is that we're going to do in this space. And then, of course, with kids, we do the CyberSecurity School Challenge, and we draw, we don't create our own curriculum. We draw from like ISC Squared and other organizations. So I encourage, ladies, I encourage you to become a member. We have a national conference. We also have an upcoming event in May called Cyber Women on the Hill, a public-private partnership. It's a first time for us. It'll be very interesting. We thought we were just going to hold a regional event, and we were invited to Capitol Hill. That's how important this is. And everyone that we're talking to, regardless of political affiliation, will agree that there's a tremendous labor shortage and we need to diversify the ranks. Why don't I just pause there and entertain some questions? Questions, comments, outbursts? No? No emotional outbursts? No? Cries of, what do you do? It's post-lunch.
Great. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.